Hello, everybody, and welcome to another great episode of My EdTech Life. Thank you so much for joining us on this beautiful day, and wherever it is that you're joining us from around the world. Thank you, as always, for all of your support. We appreciate all the likes, the shares, the follows. Thank you so much to all our new YouTube subscribers. As you know, our goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers, and we're almost there. But thank you to all our new subscribers, all our new followers. We really appreciate you engaging with our amazing conversations and connecting with our amazing guests. As you know, we do what we do for you to bring you some amazing conversations. And today I am really excited because I have two gentlemen that are here that I follow on LinkedIn. And if you're not on LinkedIn and following these gentlemen, please make sure that you do. They are here to talk about their new book, their newest release that has just come out shortly, probably within the last week or so. And I'm really excited to have them just be here, share their work, their heart, and their vision for technology in the classrooms. So I would love to welcome to the show Nick Potkalitsky and Mike Kentz. How are you gentlemen doing today?
I'm doing great, doing great.
Yeah,
Thank you
doing
so much
great.
for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Yes, thank you so much also for reaching out. And as always, this is a great opportunity to just throw that in that if you guys are ever interested on being on the show, just shoot us a DM and we can definitely make that happen. And so thank you, Mike, for reaching out and for also giving me the opportunity to, share my platform with you all to be able to share the work that you're doing. So I'm really excited about today's conversation. But before we dive in, I would love for my audience members who may not be familiar with your work yet or have not connected with you yet to get to know a little bit about you. So we'll go ahead and start with Nick. Nick, can you give us a little brief introduction and what your context is within the education space?
Yeah, I've been a teacher for about 20 years, and I have taught Latin, the humanities. I've also taught English most recently, and I've taught middle school through college. I have a PhD in media, rhetoric, and narrative studies, and sort of really got excited about AI when it kind of landed in our laps about 2 years ago, and kind of took it as a challenge to rethink some of the basic premises of my curriculum. And since then, I've just been kind of deeply researching the space. I've started a AI consultancy called Pragmatic AI Solutions, and offering keynotes and AI literacy trainings and online courses. And yeah, writing a Substack, educating AI, and we have well over 3,500 subscribers over there. Just a really vibrant community that really brings a lot of energy and excitement to my life every week. And yeah, I mean, who I wouldn't have imagined, I would have been, you know, so deeply immersed in the tech space as I am right now. But I think, AI has kind of called us to a sort of a new awareness in the teaching field. And, uh, I just sort of surprisingly found that, my background, this deep background in the humanities has, allowed me to engage in a really sort of special and thoughtful way. And, Mike and I do a lot of talking about that, about how humanists have really a lot to offer to this particular conversation right now.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate it. Mike,
Yeah.
how about you?
Yeah, my background is also in the humanities. And as Nick said, I'll consider myself, I've never really been the most tech savvy person in the world, but AI kind of opened up, as Nick said, this opportunity to be a part of conversations just from a different angle. And I think we both enjoyed, mixing and melding the sort of humanities and STEM perspectives on what it would mean to bring AI into education and how it works and what it looks like. But my background started as a financial journalist. Um, I was covering the very exciting world of over-the-counter derivatives, believe it or not, for 6 years for a couple of trade publications in New York. And I loved being a reporter. Honestly, I loved it, but I didn't really want to write about finance, and it wasn't very fulfilling or satisfying to me as a human being. And after about 6 years of that, I decided to switch into education. And so about 10 years ago, became a middle school writing teacher at a public charter school. And I did that for 6 years. And then I moved to the high school level and taught English at an independent school in Savannah, Georgia. And along the way, got a master's in the art of teaching and then got a master's in creative writing. Um, and like Nick said, Nick talked about sort of, I think he used the word a challenge, right? When AI came out, like this is sort of a challenge to think about our practices and think about our role and think about our purpose. And I think for me, it was very much a purpose question. What is my purpose now? If AI can do these things that I've traditionally been teaching and valuing, where do I fit? What is my job? What is my role? How do I contribute in a positive way? It took me a little bit of time to get there, I'll be honest. But once I got there, it became my driving force. And that's what I've been focused on for the last year. And I also have a Substack blog. I was honestly very inspired by Nick's work to start my own. I started mine just this last spring, but I had been reading Nick's and other people's for a while and eventually started to feel like, okay, I want to be a part of this conversation. I want to get involved. And from there, presented some of the things that I've done in the classroom and also started a consultancy myself. And I decided actually to leave the classroom this summer. And so now I'm full time in the professional development world, trying to help K-12 schools and higher ed as well in certain situations adapt to AI in education, whether it's curriculum design, consulting on policy, or workshops to help people get up to speed. So that's where I am now.
Excellent. Thank you so much for sharing. And I know we're going to be talking about today, you have a new book that's come out, AI in Education, the K-12 Roadmap to Teacher-Led Transformation. And Mike, I'm assuming also because you are doing some work in higher ed space, although the title says K-12 Roadmap. I mean, I know that a lot of these things that you share here can easily be transferred into higher ed as well. So I'm looking forward to hearing a little bit more about this and your book. So I would love to hear, and I'll start with you, Mike. I mean, first of all, the concept of this book, the idea, how did this come about, and how did you and Nick both link up to write this book?
It started on Substack. Honestly, we were both writing about a lot of the same issues from different angles, and we connected that way. And when we started talking, we recognized that we had a lot of similar ideas, but we also appreciated the fact that we were not coming at it from the same lens, and we were maybe thinking about the future slightly differently, but again, driving in the same direction. And so once after a while, we thought, okay, well, we kind of complement each other in a way. And Nick has an incredible background as an academic, as a PhD, as someone who is really very strong in research. And I tried to bring some experiments that I did in the classroom, a lot of analogies, and tried to just bring some sort of a separate element in. And we worked on it. We started working on it, I think, Nick, in the early summer, right?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so and then along the way, I think to your point about the title, when we talked about, okay, what's the thrust here? What are we really trying to say? And, Nick, you can kind of put it into your own words, but for me, the way I was thinking about it is like a lot of teachers were looking to policymakers to sort of provide the answers. And from my perspective, I really wanted to push educators to experiment and kind of get involved, get proactive, and start to make some headway into this space so that they could be a part of the conversation too. I found it very powerful to get involved myself. And so that's why the title says teacher led transformation. Let's get teachers involved in all of the conversations so that it's influenced by what's happening in the classroom. And that was where we ended up when we put it all together.
Excellent. Nick, how about yourself? Tell me a little bit about that concept. And then obviously one thing that I did notice is that the chapters, the way that they're written too as well, it's like almost like you just alternate in the chapters, whereas opposed many times you see with co-authors, I mean, everything is not like blended together, but here you kind of took that approach. So tell me a little bit about, again, linking up with Mike on this project, how did it come about? And then tell us a little bit about that also with the chapters too.
Yeah. I remember we sort of synergized around the concept of process. So he reached out to me after I put out an article on process pedagogy, kind of shifting away from too much of an emphasis on high stakes grading, for instance, and I've been doing more outcomes based, standards based grading for a while now. And so when AI kind of landed in our lap and kind of eroded the integrity uh, of the products that students were generating, it, it just seemed like sort of a no-brainer to shift into more of a process portfolio kind of mindset. And one of my chapters is kind of focusing on a more portfolio kind of style of writing instruction. And he reached out and said, I've been doing this grading the chats kind of thing. And I looked at it and I was like, wow, that's, as Mike kind of said, it was a delightful kind of complementarity that it wasn't exactly what I was doing, but there was kind of enough dissonance there that there's like creativity that emerged when we started to put our ideas like side by side. And then, in terms of the formatting, why sort of blend our voices when each of our voices had like this distinctive element? And so we kind of kept this dialogue sort of going. And and then and we kind of have this like back and forth sort of energy throughout the text. And then like stepping back and thinking about, overall purpose of the text itself. What we're sort of doing here is we're two teachers who are deeply engaged in this work, and like many teachers, we're sort of doing it without a safety net beneath us. We're kind of designing um, these methods as we are trying them out, and and I guess there's one perspective on that, and it can be a very sort of like fearful perspective. Like what are these teachers kind of doing? And and I think we have those voices out there in our community, to our, let's wait for absolute rock solid data out there before we make any moves into the space. And luckily we are starting to get that rock solid research, and I'm cooking up a post for next week about that. Uh, it, but at the same time, we can sort of think about, this is the experimentation that teachers have always been doing, and why not sort of shine a light through our title and through our text on this transformation that teachers kind of across the country are engaging in, and sort of give them a lift and make them feel sort of included in this process of change, because you know ultimately we're just offering one slice of a solution, and we're sort of inviting our readers into like a larger collaboration. That's what's, I think, most exciting about this moment, for people like Mike and I.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that you mentioned, it's the collaboration piece, and really just having those conversations. I'm always honest with everybody that shows up here. I'm one of those, like, I'm in the middle. I try to find that balanced approach. I mean, obviously I see both sides, and not necessarily a wait and see kind of person, but really just doing my own research and doing those things, and but also learning, and also going out and hearing people out and listening to new things. And this is what I love about our community, at least with everything that has happened in the last 2 years, the
Mm.
conversations that have sparked and the ideas and the thought process, which is something that is definitely exciting, but although very scary too as well for a lot of educators. And of course, like Mike, you mentioned, like, wow, now with this out, it has me questioning, what I was doing and the practices that I was doing and how I was teaching certain things. So I want to ask you, Mike, because this is the chapter one, was something that was very interesting and it really caught my attention. And then we'll come back to you, Nick. But I just want to talk to you about that and talking about that grief process, the 5 stages of grief. Can you tell us a little bit about that, and, how we might be able to still balance that with, I guess, kind of still the research, and making sure that when we are introducing anything, we're still very, I guess, just cautious advocates of that, because sometimes we may move through the process too fast, but maybe have not done enough research yet to see what is good or what will work for us. So walk us through that chapter and that thought process of that grief process for all us educators.
Sure. Yeah. I think when we, Nick and I both talked about looking in the mirror a little bit after AI kind of landed on us, and what's our role? What's our purpose? What's the challenge that we now need to rise to meet? A lot of times when you start asking yourself that question, it gets pretty heavy. It gets heavy quite fast, because you start to wonder, okay, what does the future look like? Who am I? What is my role? And what I noticed for myself first was that I was very much in denial for at least the first 8 months after ChatGPT was released. My department head was sending us emails with articles to read ahead of department meetings, and I just wouldn't even open them because I was so frankly depressed. Because as a writer and as an English teacher, I'm sitting here going, what's this going to do to the value of the written word? And it wasn't for a while until I kind of snapped out of that denial phase and started to get to a place where I felt comfortable experimenting. And then when I started working with colleagues, and I'll get to that grief framework in a second, but as I started talking to colleagues, I noticed that they were kind of in the same place that I had been in, and they were potentially angry about it, which I think is totally rational and reasonable. They were maybe a little bit depressed about what it was doing to the English classroom, and other classrooms. And that's when the idea of, this feels like a grieving process. That's when that dawned on me. It's like, I think we're all grieving. I think we're grieving the loss of the old way of teaching or the old way of assessing student thinking or student learning. And if you look at the 5 stages of grief, it involves denial first, and then it involves passing through a stage of anger, a stage of bargaining, a stage of depression until you ultimately reach acceptance. And so the purpose of writing that chapter and also putting it at the front of the book was to try to make educators feel seen a little bit. If you are angry, what I say at the beginning of a workshop that I do for this is, you're right. You know, you have every reason to be frustrated right now. The pace of change is incredibly rapid. We're being asked to flip everything on its head, or not everything, but a lot of things on its head without a ton of really evidence-backed research that we can rely on. And that can be very unsettling from an emotional and psychological place. And so if you are feeling any of those first 4 stages of grief, again, as I did and continue to, there's nothing wrong with that. You give yourself that grace to say, It makes sense that I feel that way." And once we sort of self-identify that we potentially are in that grieving process, it starts to become easier to move through it. Once you look in the mirror and go, "Okay, this is grief. This is what I'm experiencing." Then there are proven models. There's proven practices in cognitive behavioral therapy that allow us to move through it. And that's what that chapter goes through. If you are angry, there's ways to sort of flip that energy into a positive, proactive place. But to your point, Alfonso, there is that kind of, at the end of the rainbow, there's this risk that we get. Let's say we move through those first 4 stages and we get to acceptance. There's this risk of maybe overzealous excitement or experimenting in ways that are maybe not as responsible as we would like, because we don't know. We just don't know what's going to work, and we don't know what's not going to work. And so that chapter tries to not only move through those first 4 stages, but at the end say, okay, when you get to acceptance, what you're trying to maintain is a balance. You're trying to maintain a stoic acceptance where you're okay with the reality that we're in, and you recognize that it's going to be turbulent, and you recognize that we need to develop some forward momentum here, but you're also not necessarily, just saying everything's, I'm just going to do every AI thing. I'm going to use every AI tool, and I'm going to put them all in front of my students, and I'm just going to let them do everything, because that's just as bad as not doing anything. And so that sweet spot in the center of cautious optimism or guarded optimism is where really thoughtful, responsible experimentation and research happens. And that's when we start to get some really useful and helpful conclusions that will help the entire education community.
Mm.
And so we lead with that chapter. We decided to lead with that chapter to, again, make people feel seen. And then, okay, once we get to that stoic acceptance, the rest of the book, I think, is a lot easier to read once you're in that place, because that's when Nick and I start getting into some of the practical aspects, which can be a little unsettling if you haven't dealt with that first.
Yeah.
So that's the idea there.
Excellent. Now, one of the things that I do like about this chapter, Mike, and I'll be honest with you, like I said, I know that even for myself, working in the role that I do, and being with tech and always being very tech forward and doing all this research, oftentimes it's, you see a lot of people that are very excited about this, and you see them post and so on. And sometimes I feel like, you know, it's okay to understand that teachers may feel these grieving stages where they're like, "Hey, you know what? I'm not ready for this," or "I'm still like, hey, I'm still transitioning into this. I'm still trying to figure things out," and that there are people, resources that they can look to. But sometimes it's like, "Hey, why aren't you doing this?" Like the fear of missing out. You need to make sure that you're doing this already and doing this. And back in show 170, Dr. James Breyer was on, and this was probably, 2 years ago to the day probably that he was on. He was talking about how people, how you're describing, many people are questioning, their practice and what's happening and how it's changing so quick, which sometimes not all change is bad at all whatsoever. Obviously incremental change, kind of getting used to those things. But it's just been, very difficult for me many times where there are people that are just so excited, that are like, hey, why aren't you even here yet? Why aren't you doing this yet? And I always say, like, hey, it's what works best. One of the things that I loved about what you said, though, is as you would with a student, like you gave that example, sometimes we just want to throw all the tech at them, but that could just be just as bad as not doing anything. So I always say, okay, how about we let the students lead with the tech and see what it is that works for them? Because maybe for that particular assignment, it may not be that particular platform that you want to use. It may be something else. So how about you let them lead? And I feel the same way with teachers as well, where we want to throw everything at them, but maybe that approach of like, hey, let me let you lead with the tech. What is it that you would like to do or accomplish first or learn first? Start with that and then just continue to grow because I credit Renee Dawson for always saying, in any training session, you're always going to have the speedboats, the tugboats, and the anchors. And you're going to have the speedboats, which are going to take off and they're going to take off right without you. You barely even taught them how to do something and they're already like on level 2, level 3. They probably already got their certification while they're there with you and so on. And then you've got the tugboats that are a little slower, but they're willing to help, those anchors and they're still working side by side and doing that. So I do appreciate this chapter and I do appreciate you being very conscious of, teachers' feelings and how they're that, this process, even though it's been 2 years, it's still a work in progress. But that's one thing that I do appreciate because oftentimes it's like, go, 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 why aren't you here yet? So, and people like really feel like they're really like hurt and sad that people aren't seeing this or are at that level. But hey, it's perfectly acceptable. So I love that. Nick, I want to turn over to you now for chapter 2, AI's impact on existing educational changes. So I want you to tell me a little bit about, what your thought process is on that shift that we talk about so much from that standardization in education to now personalization in education through AI. What has been your experience, with your students in your practice and through your research?
Well, this whole chapter is kind of came out of a sort of a step back from AI as kind of a solution to every educational problem approach, which I started to see sort of emerging. I think it was in kind of late 2023, where we started to see articles kind of saying that, like linking AI to Bloom's sort of Sigma problem. And we had the optimists who were very much, and I think like Sal Khan and was very much in the camp that we were about to see education sort of totally transformed through advanced tutor applications, and that sort of all that sort of rhetoric, and I was sort of suspicious of this kind of rhetoric, just as a having been in the business for a while and having seen other uh, tech kind of come in and around similar sort of promises, and so I started to think about AI sort of as like a lens that allowed us to look at existing problems within our school system, and one of those, focusing on problems that were sort of emerging from standardization. And sort of the way, in particular for me, was the way that we assess students, the way that we set up our workflows in classrooms, the way that we still sort of are relying on, teacher dissemination of information as opposed to more project-based learning. Um, so it seemed to me like AI, when it got dropped into schools, it sort of exacerbated all these existing problems that were kind of already there. And instead of kind of thinking of it as kind of a like this radical kind of solution for these problems, I started to think about it as kind of like a microscope that allowed us to drill down and think about, oh, we actually do have like longstanding alternative pedagogies that are kind of like sitting there on the fence in many cases. And also we have other teachers that are the quiet pioneers that have been working on these pedagogies for multiple decades. and having amazing outcomes in small ways, and sort of chipping away and seeing great success. So I started to think about, how can this AI moment be an opportunity for us to think more broadly about, okay, we can use AI to zero in on these longstanding problems, but also then bring to surface some of these solutions that we've maybe been systemically a little bit hesitant to adopt in a broader, more widespread way. At the time of publication and composition, I was doing a good deal of writing about, looking at, more of like curricular reform. And that's kind of just like, sort of like a framing piece, to, as one sort of component of the larger package here. Admittedly, it's a sort of a bitter, pill to swallow for, the individual educator, who doesn't necessarily have that much control in terms of systems. But you can also look at it as sort of an affirmation for teachers who maybe are trying project-based learning, or who are trying to do alternative kind of assessments. Like, you are on a good pathway, and um, that this is something that is going to really help you in the long term. Be more responsive to these new technologies, and then we get to more specific practices kind of later on in the text, make it much more concrete. That's kind of like a heavy theory chapter, if I'm being honest.
Yeah. No, but it's great, and the information that you've shared is definitely something that is very useful, and, like, I
Yeah.
myself, is it's something that really is in the back of my mind, and not only for me, but for many educators also, as well, as how we can help improve the education process and just really change things around. I've always been a big proponent, and, like, even before we talked about, or we even started the show and recording, was going to project-based learning and,
Yeah.
creating portfolios and having these capstone projects that had built, on the weekly, on the monthly, all the way and lead up to a final project. And you're putting all of these tools to, or using all these tools, all these skills, critical thinking, thought process, collaboration, communication, all of those, tools and soft skills. And so that's something that I really do enjoy and like. And of course, I, I know that there's many people on both sides, and so I can definitely see how this can help transform in many ways some of the things that we are currently doing. To obviously, for me, I'm all about efficiency too as well. But also, I want to talk to you now, and we'll come back to Mike in the next question, because I wanted to talk to you about your thought too as well. In chapter 3, one of the things that is mentioned here is talking about, obviously, we know that as quickly as an AI startup can go up, it can easily go down. And
Hmm.
especially with the way that we see things, changing continually, and you're seeing changes to access to APIs, you're seeing so many large language models, and then all it takes is one error, one mistake, like as we all know with All Here and the
Right.
chatbot for LAUSD. So we know that there's oftentimes those risks, and many, obviously, ed tech companies always come at it with the app first approach. Like, this app is going to solve this issue, when immediately it just may turn into, like you mentioned here, sort of like a band aid. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this, and what would be your best advice for not only the school leaders at the top, but as far as teachers or even people in my roles that are like that mid-level, coordinators for digital learning. What would be some advice for that in the near future, and what should we look out for?
Yeah, well, I mean, I work with small school districts and, very large publics. And, right now the big move is to buy into, some sort of, you know, AI, like an AI app sort of across the board. I won't name the major three products, but, uh, something that has sort of like ready spots, can kind of generate rubrics and, or emails, that kind of thing. And, I think, this is kind of like maybe the tech before the teacher kind of approach. And I understand it. In terms of teachers don't have a lot of time, and maybe not a lot of there's not a lot of engagement, and kind of put the tools and just kind of see what teachers do and give them an API that's FERPA protected, and then gather the data and see whether to continue with the product. Maybe do some limited trainings through the corporation or whatnot. So that's like one, like the dominant model that's happening. And
Mhm.
um, and I guess I would sort of advise schools to maybe think about it in terms of like developing AI soft skills that are sort of independent to any particular app right now. I mean, I think you do have to have something that teachers can kind of use, uh, sort of as part of a training cycle, and so you'd have to open up some sort of application through a firewall. But to like just teach them some basic prompting, and just how AI kind of works with just an AI trainer. Who's maybe not necessarily affiliated with a corporation. It's probably like just another teacher within your district who has a passion. Is probably a better way to go. Because I mean, I'd hate to see a whole generation of teachers who are just kind of just only know how to use like like the salad bar version of AI versus, being able to know how to like make the salad themselves. Because I think ultimately for us to like if we ever do get to a place where we are using AI in the classrooms with students, and I still think that's a very like open question. The things that Mike and I are doing are very much exploratory in our books, and we're definitely not saying, let's just radically alter the curriculum and go full AI and writing classrooms. What we're suggesting is maybe trying it out for a lesson, once a semester. That's kind of where we're at actually in our classrooms. And so, but even to keep up with students and their own use outside of class, I think teachers need a little bit more literacy than, what they might get with the salad bar approach. And I think kind of to your point earlier, that kind of going like following where the student wants to go, like putting a teacher in front of an AI app that has some protections, and some security sort of built in, and kind of seeing where they want to go with it, is as opposed
Sure.
to having like a lot of pre-selected options. I think you're going to get also better outcomes that way. So when I can get an ear that listens to me, that's kind of where I'm advising schools to go right now. But ultimately, most schools are just looking for, you know, let's just look for a tech solution that we can kind of buy into.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, those buy-ins are really expensive, and you know,
Yes.
you know,
I
guys
agree
like
with you.
guys like Mike and I, we could set you up with a much cheaper solutions, and probably higher quality, you know, literacy content. So, but that's just how the market is right now. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think from what I'm hearing from you too is just really going back to, talking about putting teachers and putting the tool in front of the teachers and see where they want to go. I mean, the transformation and all of the changes will come through the biggest asset, which in this case would be the teachers. They being
exactly.
the biggest asset that you have. And like you mentioned, sometimes it's just that one speedboat or two speedboats that you have down the hall or in your campus or in your district that can help, just help other teachers or bring that ease. And I think it's very interesting because the way that we're talking about this, it's like for me, it seems like it's the same approach for maybe every year or every other year or every third year when we get a new platform. It's always like, oh great, here's another new platform that I need to learn. And oh my gosh, here and this is going to be for math and this one's going to be for science. And so it really isn't anything different. It's just really, I guess, the fact of the technology and making sure that it's safe and making sure that teachers do understand some of it, which kind of brings me and it's a nice segue to the next question. that I want to talk to Mike about in the next chapter. Mike, you talk a little bit about, and this really drew my attention, was the car engine analogy. So I want to ask you here, obviously there are some people that really think that, hey, teachers should not be using this technology if they really don't know the ins and outs of it. So, how do teachers understand, if we are going to be using or learning this new technology, manage or learn a little bit more about the limitations that this technology may have? Obviously, it would be through practice, but I just want to hear your take on that and tell us a little bit more about that car analogy too.
I think it's both, honestly. I think, you do need, to your point, you do need to know a little bit about how the engine works, quote unquote, right? You do need to understand that it's predicting sequences of text, for example. You do need to know at least some of the overview background. But I would, the car engine analogy leans into this idea that I can drive a car without knowing everything about the engine. I should probably know a little bit, right? I should probably know what it sounds like when the engine needs to get checked. I should probably know what it sounds like when I turn on the car and I go, oh, you know what? I don't think I should really take this on a long road trip. This seems like it needs to go into the shop. But at the same token, if you consider the skills that it takes to drive a car safely, it has very little to do with building an engine, fixing an engine, maintaining an engine. It's all about awareness. It's really all about being aware of your surroundings, being reactive, being present, being conscious, and of course you have to practice as well, which goes to your point. And what I try to get people to recognize is that when you're using a large language model, it's very much communication. You're writing questions and you're reading answers, or if you're using the voice mode, you're speaking and listening. And so if you can engage that part of your brain, which is the sort of the humanities side of your brain, which Nick and I talked about at the beginning, then you're going to be able to drive the car safely, and that goes back to this consciousness idea. If I'm conscious of the fact that while I'm using this, I need to go back to my ELA life, but to your point, Alfonso, there is a balance here. I mean, you can't just completely ignore understanding how the engine works. And I think for me, if I look back on kind of my journey here, I started with a prompt engineering course. That was the first thing I did. And at the beginning, I think for the first 5 minutes, it was Jules White from Vanderbilt University. I think he did talk about, here's what's going on. Here's what the engine is doing, just so you know, right? This isn't a human. Here's what it's actually doing. But then from there, he moved me into, and one of the first things that I remember, light bulb going off, he said, this is more of a creative writing skill. And he talked about the fact that his father was an English teacher. And he said, I'm actually now, he's a computer scientist, but he said, I'm leaning more into what my father taught me as an English teacher. So there is a balance, there is a mix, and you need to meld them together. But if what that chapter does after the car engine analogy and getting us to recognize that the skills are different is show that you can really split these out by the disciplines that we already have. And you can use your STEM thinking skill to understand how the machine works. But if you're focusing on safe and effective use, you're going to prioritize those humanities skills around effective communication and writing good questions and close reading answers and critically evaluating language. So it's tough because sometimes with that analogy, I don't know if this was your reaction, Alfonso, but sometimes I think people think I'm saying like, ignore the engine completely. And that's fair. That's fair because that's kind of how I wrote it. But I do recognize that there's an importance. There's a value there of at least knowing some of the basics.
Absolutely. And yes, that's wonderful. And, I totally got what you were saying on that. But like you mentioned, you can also see how people, it's like, sometimes you just don't want to worry about it. It's like, hey, as long as my car turns on, I'm good. And as long as the engine light isn't on and all these lights are on, hey, I'm good. It doesn't even matter. And although you have to know, like, hey, at this much mileage, I do need to do some maintenance. Obviously, like you mentioned, if it sounds a little bit funny, like, hey, then maybe I need to kind of check that out and things of that sort. So yes, absolutely. I agree with you on that. Now, I want to ask you, Mike, too, a little bit before we kind of start wrapping up also talking about AI literacy. One of the things that I want to ask, and both of you can answer, but I'll start with you
Mm.
first. I know that we use AI literacy or we use that term a lot. And back in episode 300, I had Benjamin Riley on the show, and he talked about, AI literacy. And, I guess he made a distinction between like that AI literacy and AI training, where oftentimes I feel like they might be kind of intertwined or maybe just mixed up a little bit. Where sometimes, and I'll be honest, I will go to a conference and we'll see something like on AI literacy, but it's really, "Hey, I'm just showing you how to use this app," as opposed to AI literacy, like you mentioned, understanding a little bit about what goes on under the hood and understanding that in a slightly bigger scale, more maybe more than what we already knew. So I want to talk to you a little bit about that as far as AI literacy and how you both where you both stand and what is it that you share with the teachers on your Substacks and so on, as far as AI literacy.
There's a very real tension here, and I think you described it well, which is that when you walk into a room and you're going to quote unquote teach AI literacy, a lot of the people who are in that particular class or workshop, they want or expect that they're going to be shown the tools, right? Show me the tools, show me how to use them, show me how it's going to make my life better. What I've found though is that when you sort of take that approach, what always happens at the end is that the teachers in the audience then say, well, what about the big issues? What about what about protecting my thinking? What about making sure that I'm still, an active participant and I'm not over relying? What about making sure that I'm not handing over all of my cognitive processes? So then what I try to do, and I think Nick does the same thing, is say, okay, we're not going to just do a tools and takes thing where we show you all the tools. Instead, we're going to talk about what it would mean to have deep AI fluency, where you understand how your word choice, for example, dramatically changes your interaction with a large language model. That's something I try to focus on a lot. Specific ways that you ask questions or the buttons you click on some of the ed tech tools, it dramatically changes how these interactions happen. So I view AI literacy more as the second version of what I just described. I try to take teachers directly to the source, to ChatGPT or Claude, and walk them through what happens when you prompt it this way, what happens when you prompt it this way. You might be able to use it this way. Here's how you have to think about it when the outputs are coming at you. And then I tell them, listen, at the end, you don't really need me to show you how the ed tech tools work, because once you know what's happening at the ChatGPT level, it's going to be very easy for you to intuitively pick up how to use some of those tools. Um, but that's not an easy thing. It's a really big concept. The idea of being fluent in AI or literate in AI is such a big, big concept. So the best I can say is I tried to just start, go right to the source and start with that mindset. Here are the mindsets you need. Here's some of the sort of philosophical frameworks. Now let's test it out a little bit. And they start to, educators start to draw their own conclusions. And I think that the best part about this is it can be passed on to students in that sort of holistic way, where students will draw their own conclusions that are thorough if you're giving them the right mindset. And I know that's a little bit sort of meta in nature, but it's the best I can answer that question.
Oh, excellent. Great. How about you, Nick? What are your thoughts?
Well, I think a lot about rhetoric in this context, and one concept in particular of voice, because it's something that kind of traffics between both, something that's more mechanistic, like the voice that's produced in terms of like a specific output, and you can kind of train AIs to take on specific voices. But then there's something more like personal, um, almost spiritual, about, your voice as something that you uniquely possess. And we see so many posts and articles kind of put out about, our students kind of losing their voice, our teachers losing their voice, their distinctive instructional footprint by engaging with AI and, using AI as an instructional assistant. So I think these like age old rhetorical concepts have like a very unique power right now. And so I have this intervention in the book, about using voice as like a tool for working with students, thinking about how they can maintain voice, when interacting with AI tools. And it's been pretty powerful in the several iterations I've done with students. And it's kind of like brought into like just a larger way of doing like secondary language instruction. It's kind of trickled down from, something that we tend to do mostly with university students, but these concepts I think are going to become increasingly more pertinent, as we think about context and voice and situation, throughout our practice as writers, and think about these powerful tools that can transform our words for a variety of different contexts in almost instantaneously. And so there's nothing like sort of an easy solution, but I think sort of by equipping our students with a more nuanced kind of architecture of terms, and our teachers too, we enabled them to kind of see sort of the nuances that are at play, and and give them kind of the power to make better choices about how to interact with these tools, and also when they don't want to, when sort of maintaining um, their voice sort of in the most ultimate sense of just refraining from using is just the best way to go about writing and communicating, because that's always going to be a choice, right? So
Yeah,
so we definitely have to position that as um, as something that is always going to be an option.
excellent.
Yeah.
All right. Well, before we wrap up with our final three questions, which are hopefully you got a chance to look it over there on the calendar invite and so on, that I'll always love to end the show. But I would definitely love for in this episode to leave my audience with some actionable steps. So I'll start with you, Mike. If there is an administrator, if there is a teacher right now that's listening to this episode who is feeling maybe either inspired or feeling or both inspired and a bit overwhelmed, what would you recommend that their first three steps would be to begin their journey with thoughtful AI usage?
I think so. I'll do administrator first because I think
Mm,
administrator and teacher are different. For an administrator, the number one thing is figure out a way to incentivize learning and experimentation among your faculty, which I'm sure every administrator is already thinking of. But that is, I think that needs to have moved up higher onto the priority scale if you're an administrator, considering the situation we're in. Um, I think having a really robust AI policy and incentive structure for experimentation and research is the type of thing that's going to differentiate schools in the future, right? Parents are going to want to know, okay, this school has thought about this. The school has an idea, even if it's not perfect. So I think as an administrator, that kind of needs to happen. And you got to find teacher leaders who are going to be willing to do some of that research. And if you can incentivize them in some way, then, you're going to generate that type of experimentation and data gathering that then allows you to really have a nice policy and be able to talk to parents and say, we have been thinking about this. We are taking steps. I think on the faculty level, the risk is being overwhelmed because teachers, as we know, are already underpaid and overworked. And so to ask them to change things on the fly is very unfair. Um, However, to the extent possible, I would say lean on community. If you can't find community directly in your school or school district, I really would recommend looking to places like Substack, LinkedIn, Blue Sky. They have been incredibly powerful for me. I wouldn't have met Nick if it weren't for Substack, and here we are today, right? So perfect case in point example. There are educators out there. Just as an aside, we host at Zaintech, we host a virtual free bi-monthly meetup for educators who want to talk AI. And it's fairly informal on purpose so that anybody can feel like they can come and at least hear or listen and share. And I think that's what has to happen from the faculty level. And the last thing I'll say for the faculty is as you engage in that, as you said, Alfonso, you probably are going to end up feeling overwhelmed again. So baby steps, give yourself grace. You deserve time and space that you need to move forward, but push yourself as much as possible to keep that forward momentum going. That is the number one thing. If you can keep a forward momentum going, it doesn't matter how fast you're going or how far you're going. As long as you're moving, you're doing the right thing, I suppose you could say.
excellent. Thank you, Mike. Nick, any action steps that you'd love to add to those?
Well, I would ask administrators to uh, engage with their teachers to see what they're already working on, because there's probably some great ideas kind of happening on under the veil. And I would also advise kind of setting up sort of a cohort where those teachers who are already working with AI can come together and share ideas, and take some sort of leadership within the community, in terms of kind of being sort of like an AI committee that um, can start to make some plans in terms of AI literacy. So it's always good to allow teachers to have some time to do some training. So it's definitely hard, as Mike kind of alluded to sort of train yourself sort of on the fly. So seeing a leader kind of setting aside a little bit of time, even if it's only an hour during a PD, or an hour or two over a couple PDs, uh, towards just voicing some conversations about this new technology, it kind of goes a long way. It kind of puts it on the map, as an issue that is worthy of consideration, as opposed to something that can continue to kind of fly under the radar. And for teachers, just continue the amazing work that you're doing. But if you can kind of engage in conversations with your students, sort of about their use, it really goes a long way. And I kind of think about transparency as a very important value right now. And I find that I really learn a lot from my students in terms of their own practices and their own engagements, and you'll actually find that more often than not, they're actually pretty opposed to AI and its sort of disruption of school, and that's an interesting perspective to get, and it sort of tempers your own practice a bit and your own potential optimism about these new tools. So yeah, activate and your student learners and kind of see what they're engaged in with these new technologies. And yeah, just keep up the great work you're doing, teachers.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen. I really appreciate your time today and everything that you shared. And again, AI in Education, the K-12 Roadmap to Teacher-Led Transformation is the title of the book. Please make sure that you look out for it on Amazon. Please make sure that you connect with Mike and Nick. And all of that information will definitely be in the show notes. That way you guys can definitely connect. I highly recommend, like Mike said, it's, find your niche, find your click there on socials, whether it's LinkedIn, Substack, Blue Sky, wherever it is, you're always going to find some wonderful educators. So, just find and connect. And I promise you, you'll definitely, you won't regret it. You'll definitely learn a lot. And especially, with these two gentlemen, with Nick and Mike and all the great stuff that they put out there. So you'll definitely see that in the show notes. But before we wrap up, gentlemen, I always love to end the show with the last three questions here. We're going to start with you, Nick, first. So as we know, every superhero has a weakness or a pain point. So for Superman, we know that kryptonite kind of just, just kind of weakened him in that sense that he would lose, some of that power that he had. So I want to ask you, in the current state of education, what would you say is your current edu kryptonite?
I would have to say high stakes assessments. So yeah, definitely.
All right. All right. Mike, how about yourself? What is your current edu kryptonite?
Mine's a little broader. I think it's just FOMO. I want to be at every conference. I want to be talking to every person. I want to hear every podcast and read every article. And I feel like if I miss every Substack that's posted or something like that, that I'm going to miss some hugely important things. So FOMO, and then I get paralyzed by it. So that's mine.
Hey, you and I have a lot alike in that sense. Like seriously, the FOMO, but then it's I get that analysis paralysis, and I'm like, okay, I ended up not doing anything, but I
Yeah.
still have that FOMO. All right. Question number two. This time I'll start with you, Mike. If you can trade places with a person for one day, who would it be and why?
Now, does this need to be education focused or
No,
all
doesn't
right?
have to be education focused.
Jalen Brunson, the point guard for the New York Knicks, Jalen Brunson. I'm a big basketball fan and a big basketball player and a big Knicks fan, and I would love to play at the Garden and be running the offense for the New York Knicks. So
There you
hopefully
go.
that's a good one. Jalen Brunson.
Jalen, well, definitely, I'm gonna make sure and tag Jalen on this and see if we can at least make something happen, or somehow you two can both connect or something. That'd be great.
Cool.
All right, Nick, how about yourself? Who is one person that you would love to trade places with for a day and why?
I'm thinking Neil deGrasse Tyson, so the
Okay.
astrophysicist. So I'm a big space nerd. And he's just such a brilliant guy, and I've always wanted to understand like quantum mechanics, and I've always read the popular science versions, and that's about as far as I've gotten. So
All right, great answer. And finally, the last one, Nick, we'll start with you. If you could have a billboard with anything on it, what would it be and why?
I had to write this one down, but it's learn something new, teach someone else, repeat.
Like that.
You like
Simple,
that?
short, to the point, and
Yeah,
very powerful, impactful.
yeah.
And as even then, like, I just I always think like everybody is a teacher no matter
Yep.
what, even though it may not be your profession, but everybody's a teacher. I mean, through the storytelling process and experiences, I mean, we're always learning from one another. So absolutely love that billboard. Mike, how about yourself?
Yeah, I was between 2, but I've decided right now to go with, be less impressed, get more involved.
I like it.
And I stole that from Matthew McConaughey, but
I
I
like
love it.
that.
I heard him talk about it once and I was like, that is a great way of thinking about things. Be less impressed, get more involved. Because I just think going back to the analysis paralysis thing, sometimes we're really, really impressed by whoever and we think, well, I can't, I'm not on that level. You are on that level.
Yeah.
You have plenty to offer and you should contribute and get involved.
Yeah, definitely. And that kind of falls in line with imposter syndrome too, as well. Like, yes, that's what you mentioned too. I mean, we get the analysis paralysis, but that imposter syndrome of like, oh man, I'll never be like that. But no, absolutely. It's all about just doing it, trying it. And, like you said, really having that confidence. So thank you so much. So, gentlemen, thank you again for just a wonderful conversation. And for all our audience members, thank you as always for making my EdTech life what it is today. Thank you so much for catching this episode. And also, please make sure that you visit our website at myedtech.life, where you can, again, listen to this episode and the other 301 episodes that we already have. It's been 4 years in the making, and we have you to thank for all of that support. Because, like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, we do what we do for you to bring you amazing conversations, amazing guests like we did today. And we're just really excited to bring these conversations into the education space to continue to help our education space continue to grow. So thank you as always for all of your support. And if you're not following us yet on all socials, please make sure that you follow us at My EdTech Life pretty much on all socials. And if you haven't done so yet, jump over to YouTube, give us a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel. Our goal is to get to 1,000 subscribers, and we'd appreciate it if you would definitely give us that thousandth subs or be. We would appreciate it if you'd be that 1,000 subscriber. That would be huge in helping our show go a long ways. But as always, my friends, thank you as always from the bottom of my heart to you. This has just been an amazing journey. So thank you so much. And until next time, my friends, don't forget, stay techie.